Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we're going back to another Spider-Man game. If you haven't noticed, we've been on a bit of a monthly cadence here with the Raimi Spider-Man games. We did 3, 2, and then 1 in this reverse order, but we're doing things right now. We're starting off with the Amazing Spider-Man on PlayStation 3 and PS Vita. And I thought let's just keep going, man. We got that Into the Spider-Verse hype going. We're gonna talk a lot about Spider-Man in June, don't you worry. And I thought now's a good time to start getting into the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man games, which one of them I have positive things to say about. The other one, oh my God. It's a traumatic experience. Amazing Spider-Man 2, we'll talk about. But right now, let's talk about some happy stuff, shall we? So if you are new here and you're into nostalgic and retrospective content, consider subscribing. Welcome aboard. And with that, let's begin with the complete box experience. We got dose for you here. We got the PS3 version, the Vita version. This was just during that time period where you'd see these console games get ported over to the Vita and they're just clearly inferior versions. But me as a Vita lover and a Vita defendant, I was like, I gotta own this thing. So here we are with my Vita copy. The back of the box says the exact same thing, so we will just focus on this one here because, as you'll see with the Vita copy, nothing else on the inside. And yeah, the cartridge is missing because it's in my Vita. So with that, let's begin. Your power, your choices, your playground. Spidey is back in Manhattan with the return of free-roaming, web-slinging action. Perform acrobatic attacks and stealth maneuvers with the brand new Web Rush combat and navigation system. Uncover the rest of Peter Parker's untold story in the original epilogue to the film. So yes, this is the tie-in video game, and usually that's got a bit of a stink on it, but what's great about this is that it continues the story after the film a little bit, which I have a reverse opinion on the movies compared to people. I haven't seen them in a while, and I've watched both of them once because I wasn't in love with either of them. I wasn't crazy about the first Amazing Spider-Man, but the second Amazing Spider-Man movie, I actually dug, but it seems like whatever I read online is the reverse of that. So this is why I'm a game critic, not a movie critic. Anyway, let's get into the manual here. Not much to be seen, unfortunately. Unfortunately, what I'm noticing actually is all Spider-Man manuals are just unceremonious. Let's just throw some friggin' webs in here. Let's throw the game controls. Let's break down the pause menu, the cell phone menu. Let's give them a notes pad section and then call it a day with the software license agreement with customer support on the back. So not much to be seen here for Complete in Box, and as you can tell by the GameStop price of $19.99, yeah, you're not paying too much for what you're getting here, but still, great game. Let's talk about it. I always like to associate my video game retrospectives with personal stories. I feel like that's a big part of what we do here is I see you sharing personal stories and about how these games got you through tough times, and I like to share my own. I don't care if people know a little bit more about me. So yeah, I was in a relationship at the time in high school, my first relationship, and your boy got cheated on. Oh man. Now I'm laughing about it now, but back then I was really down horrendously bad. But guess who picked me up with his lovely little webs and wrote me and said, Maddie baby, it's gonna be okay. That's right. The Amazing Spider-Man was here for me. And I was obsessed with this game. It just was a perfect takeaway from what a teenage boy was dealing with in the world of betrayal and trust gone, was that, the Amazing Spider-Man is just a fun open world to get lost in. So the web swinging compared to, I'd say, other older Spider-Man games feels the best here. The navigation is great, and that's really thanks to the Web Rush system. It kind of does what I wish, and this is gonna sound like a really obscure connection here, but just bear with me. It reminds me of what I wish Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi did. So remember how when I talked about that game, I said, that's a fun game to watch. The fighting looks good, but you're not really doing anything. So in the Web Rush system, it looks good because you'll choose a place that you want to Web Rush to, and sometimes Spidey will run along the walls, he'll do a sick flip off of it, and then he'll web zip himself. But you have to click and interact and make sure you're getting to these points in the map, and you're continuously doing it, so you're always engaging in the system, so it not only looks great, but feels great. Whereas something like Ultimate Tenkaichi was just, oh man, if I was a spectator, this would be awesome. Get what I'm saying? Hopefully that connection makes sense, but the Web Rush system is at the heartbeat of this game's navigation, and it makes it so fun to get around and just explore and beat up random bad guys, because what you'll find as you're exploring this open world, and this is where the obsession really sat in, is there were about, I think, 700 to 800 comic books. And I remember this was what really took me away from the teenage pain I was experiencing, because I wanted to get every single one of these comic book covers and get all 1000 gamer score on my Xbox 360. Now, I unfortunately didn't complete the job, but I got most of them. The problem is, as you start web swinging around, because these are in set locations and just start to fill in the map more and more, and as you pluck them out of the map, when I had 10 left, I was just web swinging for hours, man. And I'd finally find one. I'd web swing for hours, and I finally found one. I said, dude, I spent 6 hours today. I found 2 comic books. Now, I had fun just getting around. It was like muscle memory hopping back into this game. But no, I just, that also brought back some pain, man, because looking for those comic books, I was like, man, I want to hang around and find them, but I just can't be bothered. But to me, this was the big takeaway, was the exploration, the web swinging, the free falling, the camera perspective. I know we give Insomniac a lot of props, but I really do think Beanox doesn't get their roses. And understandably why, when you look at Amazing Spider-Man 2 and the travesty that video game is. Again, we will talk about that in a separate video, probably our next Spider-Man video. But when it comes to Beanox with the Shattered Dimensions, Edge of Time on a story level, when you look at the Amazing Spider-Man 1, I think by Amazing Spider-Man 2, they were just kind of burnt out. But they made some pretty good Spider-Man video games, and this was just another one of those. But it captured that classic Spider-Man 2 feel while also modernizing in meaningful ways. So it wasn't just the web swinging that felt good. It wasn't just the web rush that worked and looked really great. It was also the combat was the closest we had got at that point in time to the Arkham universe style combat. So I always reference the Arkham games when talking about the Spider-Man games up until this point, because the reality is they had set the bar so sky high, and then Spider-Man, being arguably the most popular comic book character of all time, had to meet that quality bar, which it just couldn't because there weren't the resources or the talent to do so. So everyone was just trying to emulate the combat you'd find in the Arkham games, and you'd always get jankier versions of it. And make no mistake, the Amazing Spider-Man 1 still feels janky compared to even Arkham Asylum. But it gets close. It gets really close when you start to unlock the signature moves, you start to fight different enemy types. It gets into a rhythm, it gets into a pocket unto itself that I really genuinely think is good superhero combat. Is it perfect? No, but it definitely gets close to that free flow nature, especially when you start fighting enemies with shields and you got to vault over them. And as you see groups of enemies, you're like, okay, let me web rush and grab this big dumpster and throw it on them and knock them all out and then web them to the ground. It has a flow of its own thanks to web rush, while still, and I say this respectfully, emulating that great Arkham style combat, because by that point, no one wanted superhero games without it. For God's sakes, WB literally took the free flow combat from an Arkham game and put it into a Lord of the Rings style video game. So make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, like, this is the type of combat people wanted with any type of comic book character, period, end of story. So they really didn't have much of a choice, I think, unless they wanted to innovate in some way no one was really thinking. But yeah, they did a dang good job with the combat as far as I'm concerned. They also started to ameliorate certain issues that plagued older Spider-Man games that weren't an issue here with Amazing Spider-Man 1. One of those being the camera when you're on the ceiling. Now, don't get me wrong, there would be times you wouldn't be able to tell in the gameplay, but I'd be holding my analog stick down and I'd be going up, just based off the way the character was oriented and the way the camera was fixed and where I started crawling up the walls versus where I am at that point. You'll still have those issues, which were finally fixed by Insomniac with their Spider-Man game, but again, Amazing Spider-Man started to answer all of those problems in meaningful ways, where now I could crawl on the ceiling and see what's below me and do so without compromising myself so often. Somehow they still didn't get stealth takedowns right. Like, you'd have to drop down and smash someone's head into the ground or web them to the floor. There was no meaningful way of taking them up to a perch. That always confused me, especially when the dude you're playing as is attached to every conceivable object. Why couldn't I just, strap them with a web to the ceiling? But again, this is where progress happens. This was the start. This felt like a foundation for the future, where Beanox was looking like our guys. Like, we were seeking out these Spider-Man developers to give us more of that Arkham style quality, and it felt like they were knocking on the door and they were going to be the ones. And so with Amazing Spider-Man 2, there was that hype going in of, yo, they had a little bit of something cooking in the first game. Now we're on next gen technology. It can only go up from here. And it didn't. Oh, it did not. So those are some of the problems they answered on the gameplay front. The story. Yeah, this is not what you're here for. And I get it. It's a tie-in game, but it really does match that early to mid 2000s tie-in video game tone that you always imagine in your head perfectly. Like, it encapsulates everything. Like the ridiculous story at the beginning where you're walking through Oscorp with Gwen, you're clearly breaking the rules. The clear main villain who's talking about mutants in this derogatory way comes out and says, you're not supposed to be here, but lets you anyway because he's so obsessed with his own work. You're like, if I were the most clueless man on the planet, I would still know you, my friend, are the main villain. And then you continue on. Gwen pushes you out of the room when the mutants start breaking free. And then she calls for your help moments later, even though she said, I can handle this, and literally does nothing afterwards. It has that ridiculous, we didn't really think about this part that much storytelling. We're kind of focused on this over here, the gameplay, the comic book hero appearances. And that's where this game gets its Spider-Man 2 vibe. Like, Spider-Man 2 does not just retell the depressing movie that is Spider-Man 2. It fills in the blanks. You know, you get a little bit of Mysterio, a little bit of Rhino and all that stuff, right? So same thing here with the Amazing Spider-Man, right? You're gonna fight Rhino pretty early on in the story. You're gonna, I mean, in Amazing Spider-Man 2, for God's sakes, one of the most exciting parts about that game was Carnage. Like, that was just, what? I couldn't believe he was gonna be in the game, right? So you get that, you know, they slip in these meaningful, fun boss fights. And so it becomes this open world collectathon style game with great web swinging and decent combat. And that's kind of the rinse and repeat method it goes through, with an occasional spritzel of brand new open world activities to take on. But it never really walks out of that Spider-Man 2 pocket. Nowadays, that is problematic because now we've finally seen like a peak Spider-Man game. Like Amazing Spider-Man was great. You get something like Insomniac, which I think evolves the formula in meaningful ways. But I'm still waiting for us to escape some of the trappings of Spider-Man 2's pounding the top of a vehicle to then get the guy out of the vehicle and then beating him up. Crime solved. There's just sometimes too simplistic of open world crimes. We'll say, like, hey, you're breaking through a store, let's throw some hands. Just some meaningful quests here and there would be great for the future Spider-Man games, and I hope that's where we're going, because you get an emotional story in the Spider-Man PS4 game, and I just hope after, especially what we saw in Miles Morales as well, like another emotional story, that we're moving towards like less open world crime, whatever stuff, and more meaningful stories within solving the crime. But this game stays pretty comfortably in that Spider-Man 2 pocket, but at the time, that was great because it felt like, hey, we got Spider-Man 2, the game that really revolutionized superhero games in the early 2000s, I think, but with the updated combat, with the better web swinging, with a slightly more enjoyable story, and it all comes together to be something pretty good. So yeah, Amazing Spider-Man on the PS3 was great. You may be asking, well, what about this guy here? Again, that just inferior version compared to the PS3. The visuals aren't there. The web swinging and open world stuff is kind of there. I played this during my Christmas break last year, and you know, it's impressive that you're actually able to web swing in the open world, but like the visuals, the frame rate, it's one of those third-party Vita games that doesn't make use of the system's strength to its fullest and is maybe a little too ambitious for the little handheld that never could. But nonetheless, happy to have it in my collection, and it's fun to it's fun to trophy hunt for. But yeah, this is a great game, and I still recommend people check it out. Like, I know Insomniac has made a goated Spider-Man game, but Amazing Spider-Man 1, going back, I was pleased to say, like, oh, it's still great because it captures the epic sense of being Spider-Man really well. Like when you're fighting this giant Oscorp bot in the middle of New York City and the cameras fit perfectly and you're web swinging and just dodging these attacks. It's really cool in those moments, and it has a lot of those moments, and it also has that one thing I love out of the Batman Arkham games, which is as your journey goes on, you start to see little cuts in the costume, little rips and tears in the costume, like my man's going through a war. This is all happening in one day, and it's that visual representation that makes you admire the hero. Like, bro, I beat up Rhino, Shocker, Vulture, the list goes on, all in one day, beat up all these bad guys all in one day. I am so good at my job. I just love that they continue to do that stuff. And then some of the collectible costumes are great too. So there's a lot to love about Amazing Spider-Man. If you have a 360 or a PS3 available, this is one you should keep on your radar. And I keep telling people with every Spider-Man video, look, I know what y'all are thinking. Oh, I'll just get it whenever. Look, we saw what happened when No Way Home came out. Those Spider-Man games went up in value, right? And you were sitting there going, oh, shucks. Should have bought that Spider-Man game I really cared about. Now the prices have stabilized. They've even fallen in a lot of areas. You're not paying $120 like I did for Web of Shadows, I believe it was. You're not doing that anymore. They're still a little pricey in some instances, but you're not paying that much. So now's a good time. Pick up your Spider-Man games before the new movie comes out and everyone's tweeting about it and they want to play the games, and especially something like Shattered Dimensions, Edge of Time. They're like, yo, I want to play the time-bending Spider-Man games. I guarantee those are going to go up. Listen to your boy if you're interested in these games. Start copping now. With that, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Amazing Spider-Man. I'm looking forward to seeing some of yours down below. Take excellent care of yourselves. Please fire away with those thoughts. Again, I'm very curious if I'm alone on my love for Amazing Spider-Man. With that, I will catch you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace